Hello and welcome to the very last presentation of the semester, where we are culminating everything, thinking about what we need, how we need to prepare for climate change, and if we are getting what we need here in Brunswick, what we can do about it. So here we go. Adaptations, needs, options, implementations, and constraints. Okay. So first off, the framing of adaptation has moved further away from the focus on the biophysical vulnerability. And when I say biophysical, I mean thinking about like ecosystem health, species, individually, natural hazards, natural landscapes, right? Taking the human aspect out of it. We've moved away from that and towards a wider social and economic drivers of vulnerabilities and people's ability to respond. So putting the human back into the environment, thinking about how adaptation depends on gender, age, health, social status, so on and so on. Right. So when thinking about that, how we might plan for climate change adaptations, considering the human aspect, the human sphere, there's a few ways that we can split up the adaptation categories. Those being structural or physical, right? Like the physical built world, social, focusing really on the humans, and then institutional, taking that bigger perspective of everything. And these adaptation options should be considered overlapping rather than discrete, right? So often an adaptation measure will hit on many of these categories, not just in one. So engineered and technological adaptation options are still the most common adaptive responses, although there is a growing experience of the value for ecosystem-based social and institutional measures. So typically when we talk about, how are we going to adapt to climate change, people think about, well, what physical thing can we build? What can we engineer? What technology should we develop? Less so, but becoming more often, we're thinking about how can we reframe our government, our policy, our healthcare, things like that. So when I say structural change, again, I'm talking about things that are built. An example of this could be an ecosystem-based living shoreline versus a hard engineered seawall. Both of these things are structural, but one of them takes into account the environment. That living shoreline is better for the overall environment. And we're finding actually better at reducing wave energy and erosion as well. Other structural things that we can build are food banks, right? The physical building, the physical structure of a food bank, or the physical structure of a vaccination program. Right, both of those are structural. Some examples of some social adaptations. This could be sharing indigenous knowledge, right? Knowing that a lot of different cultures are dealing with climate change. Many have been dealing with climate change for an incredibly long time. So we learn from each other, right? Rather than just one community taking the lead and excluding all the other knowledge. Other social adaptations could be informational, right? Collecting a lot of data, thinking about who's most vulnerable in our state and how can we talk about that, share that information. Some other social options are evacuation planning, right? Pretty much any community that lives near a coast or any other natural hazard, the city has an evacuation plan. You may or may not have seen the map of Glenn County that splits us up into 2 zones, and each zone has its own evacuation plan, evacuation route, evacuation procedures. Do keep in mind, if we ever do need to evacuate from a hurricane, please do not take Interstate 95 north or south. You will not actually be getting away from the coast. Instead, you should head inland. So all of those red routes there, 82, 32, 341, that's where you need to go, not 95. Another example of a social adaptation is crop switching, right? When we talked about food availability, we talked about, some crops do better in different environments, and some cultivars of crops do even better in warmer environments. So switching which crops we plant and grow where and when is another social aspect of climate adaptation. Institutional, thinking about our institutions can guide our actions. Institutions can set up financial incentives, such as getting a tax credit for buying an electric car, or zoning laws that say, in this location, you cannot build homes because it's not safe due to these climatic reasons, right? You can't build a home on the beach. That's a zoning law, right? So all of these different categories used together are what allows us to adapt to climate change.